Hello and welcome back to J.P.'s World of Wrestling. Once again, I am your man, J.P. Today we are continuing on with my series about individual wrestlers and their Hasbro and their correlating action figure, and today is no exception. And so today we are talking about this guy, Sergeant Slaughter. Now, Sergeant Slaughter, I have to admit, I knew him mostly from G.I. Joe. I knew he was in wrestling, like in the WWF, like years ago, like back in like late 70s, early 80s, I think it was, where I think he had a feud, I think, with Pat Patterson at one point or something. But he was really, really popular, and he was like really well loved by the fans. So but I only knew him from G.I. Joe because he was on G.I. Joe for a while. There was actually a Sergeant Slaughter G.I. Joe action figure. And then during the run of the LJNs, Hasbro came out with their own LJN figure of Sergeant Slaughter, which but when me and Joe were able to get together and do videos again, maybe we'll show you the sort of the LJN version of this figure. But anyway, Sergeant Slaughter. So back in 91 or 90 maybe, Sergeant Slaughter came back to the WWF. But he came back as an Iraqi sympathizer, as a heel. And at the time, the United States was at war with Iraq. So that kind of made him like an extra special heel because he played into actual things that were going on. And so it was relatively easy for him to get heat if he would just come out and say, oh, well, I'm for our enemies, the United States enemies. So I don't like the United States anymore. I'm with Iraq. So that's, oh my goodness. Oh, my patriotic Americans everywhere like, oh, you dastardly turncoat. But I mean, he came across as like this really tough guy that was, militarily trained, and he was in the military. He wasn't really, but that's what they said that he was. But this is a pretty good figure. I like it. It's, there's no stupid open hands or weird stances or anything or weird poses. I like this figure. But like I said before on this channel, I didn't have this when I was a kid. I never owned this until years and years, actually just until like a year and a half, 2 years ago that I owned this. And I got this off of eBay. And I'm really happy about it because, like I said, I never owned this as a kid, so just holding it in my hands is like, whoa, But yeah, that's Sergeant Slaughter. Not really much more to say about him because, like I said, I didn't really know much about him. Although he did have kind of a feud with Hulk Hogan in the early '90s, WrestleMania 7. That was kind of the main event. Slaughter was the champion. Hogan came in and beat the turncoat. And at the Royal Rumble that year, Slaughter had a match against the Ultimate Warrior. And a lot of wrestling fans remember that match. That was the infamous match where Macho Man Randy Savage like really belted the Warrior like really hard with a scepter. It looked like a really stiff shot on the Warrior. That allowed Slaughter to take advantage and pick up the 3 count, win the title. And at that point, everybody was like, oh my goodness, this can't be really happening. How could this be happening? How could this Iraqi turncoat be our WWF champion? How could this be? But it was so. And Sergeant Slaughter was the champion. I think he was sort of a transitional champion because they were trying to figure out a way to put the championship back on Hogan, because the audience really wasn't taking too well to the Ultimate Warrior for some reason. They just weren't digging it as much. So they had to put it back on Hogan somehow, but they couldn't have another Hogan Warrior match. So they had to find a way, get the belt off Warrior, which was Sergeant Slaughter, and then Sergeant Slaughter wrestled Hogan. And then I think SummerSlam of that same year, there was a special match. It was a tag team match. It was Sergeant Slaughter Colonel Mustafa, which is just the Iron Sheik, and then General Adnan. All three of them versus Hogan and the Warrior on a tag team. And Hogan and the Warrior prevailed. And after that, I think Sergeant Slaughter, had a Survivor Series match where it was him, the Orient Express, and I don't know, somebody else. I think it was Colonel Mustafa. And their opponents were the Bushwhackers. I think Bushwhackers, Hacksaw Jim Duggan, and Nikolai Volkov. But the Hacksaw Jim Duggan's team, they wiped out all of Slaughter's team, so it was just Slaughter. And then Slaughter took out 3 of the 4 team members, and then something happened, and then Sergeant Slaughter was able to win the match. But after that, Slaughter, I think, turned babyface. He renounced Iraq, and he renounced everything having to do with Iraq, and he became a good guy again. And once again, the United States embraced our American hero, Sergeant Slaughter. And at WrestleMania, I think it was WrestleMania 8, he was in a 4-man tag with Big Boss Man and Big Boss Man and Hacksaw Jim Duggan and Virgil against, I think, the Nasty Boys and Repo Man, I think, and the Mountie. So, anyway, fun times, fun era in wrestling. Sergeant Slaughter. And then he was eventually inducted into the WWE Hall of Fame, or WWE Hall of Fame. Anyway, that'll do it for today's video. If you're new here, go ahead and like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.